news. Now we're going to give you the news. So let's start with our top story tonight, which is, I have a couple questions for you. We'll start with a couple of questions, shall we? Did you know that the United States is in a state of emergency right now in Ukraine? Meaning your government right now is allowed to use expanded government powers to watch you, to surveil you, and to, quote, take care of you. Do you feel taken care of by your government? All because of Ukraine. Did you also know that the United States is one step closer to a digital dollar tonight? And both of these things are connected through executive power and the expansion of the White House's power and President Biden's power. Over the past few days, President Biden has quietly signed a few executive orders that expand the surveillance powers of the United States government and take away power from you. So let's go through these, and we're going to start with Ukraine before we get to the digital dollar piece of this. But first, in the year 2014, unbeknownst to almost no one, and shortly after the Obama administration led a coup in Ukraine to install a puppet government, President Obama signed an executive order at the time, the White House declared that Russia annexing Crimea presented a, quote, extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States, constituted by the actions and policies of persons that undermine democratic processes and institutions in Ukraine, threaten its peace, security, stability, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, and contribute to the misappropriation of its assets. That's an important word, misappropriation. Misappropriation of its assets. Do you guys know that that misappropriation of assets is another name? Can you guys think of another name for misappropriation of assets? If you said stealing, the first word that came to my mind was embezzlement. Okay. So if you said embezzlement, then you are correct, sir. Misappropriation of assets. Really interesting wording in an executive order from the President of the United States in Ukraine after they led a coup that installed a puppet government. The misappropriation of assets, embezzlement. You could also use the words theft, stealing, swindling. You could look up a thesaurus or a thesaurus. So all of the money that's been stolen by Ukrainian officials and is misappropriated or embezzled is the fault of the Russians, right? Because no, it couldn't be the Ukrainians. It couldn't be the corrupt Ukrainian government that was misappropriating assets, which we've highlighted here on the show. It's the fault of the Russians under this executive order. It's a great cover document, actually, to cover and hide their own theft, deceit, and plundering of the Ukrainian gold, which the United States did, swooped in and stole all of its gold, and assets, and also its land and everything else. But it's Russia's fault. It's literally written there right in this document by President Obama.
Yes.
It's crazy. So let's get this right. In 2014, Obama overthrows a democratically elected government that was pro-Russian, by the way, stages a bloody coup, and installs a puppet government in Ukraine that is anti-Russian. That's what happened in 2014. Not only that, it turns Ukraine into a NATO proxy. So then, of course, it can move right up to Russia's border. But under this executive order, the U.S. is worried that Russia is a threat to democracy. You follow this logic? It's laughable, of course. So Russia.
So laughable that Zelensky did a comedy bit about it. About how Obama was the new president of Ukraine.
I totally forgot about that. Why didn't you remind me? I would have dropped that clip in here.
I don't know, but I'm telling you right now that he did a bit about how now Ukraine is run by Obama after the 2014 coup.
Right.
He knew that. That was his bit. That was not my joke. I tell terrible jokes.
That's and you get hit in the head with ukuleles. So
I might now be brilliant. Things are just popping up left and right.
It's like Costanza giving up sex. He's suddenly a genius.
It's like the plot of Who Killed Roger Rabbit.
Don't do that, by the way. So let's get this right. This is unbelievable, right? That we install a puppet government and it's Russia's fault with all of this. But since President Obama signed this declaration, President Biden has now expanded it multiple times, including this week. So here's the document that was originally written by President Obama and continued, by the way, with less authority or less usage under President Trump, although he used it for a border wall. Totally unrelated, though, totally different executive powers. But this one has now been extended by President Biden. The notice on the continuation of the national emergency with respect to Ukraine document right there on the White House website, which you can read. On March 6, 2014, by executive order. And it goes through the details. So according to this, it gives the president expanded surveillance powers that don't need congressional approval. And oddly, just days before the Russian invasion back in February of last year, odd timing on all of this, President Biden signed another executive order giving himself even more powers to further expand the scope of the national emergency. It's a national emergency for you, Americans. Why? So it's almost like they knew Russia would respond to being provoked for 8 years, right? So we do this for 8 years. We keep moving NATO closer and closer and closer. Keep provoking, and by the way, keep attacking the Donbass for 8 years. 14,000 people killed. Just keep doing that. It's almost like we knew that this would be the response, right? Even Angela Merkel admitted that the Minsk agreements were a facade, a charade, right? They knew it was meant to provoke. They were never going to adhere to them anyway. It was meant to provoke. So the White House, according to the Epoch Times, says the White House stated that the executive orders deal with individuals who undermine Ukraine's democratic processes, as well as threaten the country's security, peace, and sovereignty. Anybody in our chat room right now feel safer about this? The White House stated that executive orders deal with.
Yeah, I'm very uncomfortable with the phrase deal with it.
We'll deal with you.
The mob deals with things.
We'll deal with you. It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
This isn't a presidential document.
Yes, I know. I am also concerned about that because obviously I wonder, what does it mean to undermine Ukraine's democratic process? Like, is it, and threatens the country's security, peace, and sovereignty? So if you have, let's say, any thoughts that are against continuing to support Ukraine, does that mean you could be accused of not being pro-peace and therefore you're under surveillance? Or you're, going to be dealt with. So these are open-ended questions that it seems like this document is giving itself free leeway to interpret.
Yeah, we will deal with you if you undermine Ukraine or Ukraine's sovereignty. Oh, you mean just like the United States did when we overthrew your government and installed our own government? But we'll deal with you. The USA Today, I don't know if you guys know the USA Today. Often you'll find it at hotels, and then later you use it to line a bird cage, or you use it to wrap up fish and chips if you want to eat fish and chips. But you don't read USA Today. It's arguably worse, maybe worse than the New York Times, as one of America's worst newspapers.
It's picture heavy anyway. It's hard to read it.
Yeah, it's really bad. But the USA Today, the bird cage lined newspaper, even asked this question. I can't believe they did. They asked this question in their opinion page. From student loans to masks, why does Biden want to keep us in a perpetual emergency? Yeah, using emergency powers. It's long past time for Biden to end the national emergency and give up the tremendous powers that go along with it. USA Today writes.
Oh,
Wow.
You mean just like the surveillance powers that Bush took after 9/11 and gave those back nicely?
Right.
Put them in a box when he was done?
Just like Trudeau did in Canada, and then was like, didn't want to give them back after he expanded his powers after the trucker convoy.
Yeah. I mean, name one politician that gave the powers back after they expanded their powers.
George Washington. That's about it.
Okay. That was a good one. You named one.
The powers give President Biden almost limitless authority. Are you anti-war? Do you have positions that speak out against the corrupt Ukrainian government? The Biden administration has given itself emergency authority to, quote, take care of you. Now, the Brennan Center for Justice has taken an even deeper look at the power grab. They discovered that under these circumstances, these extra constitutional powers that Biden now has, President Biden has 123 additional powers that he wouldn't have otherwise, just being elected. 123.
Wow.
As the Brennan Center says, many are measured and sensible. but others seem like the stuff of authoritarian regimes, they write, giving the president the power to take over domestic communications like websites, emails, radio stations, television stations, and seize Americans' bank accounts and deploy U.S. troops to any foreign country under these expanded powers. That's the document he just signed for himself. Here's the details of the Emergencies Act. I'll put it up on your screen. The National Emergencies Act, in its current form, lacks any protections for, like, checks on this, basically, right? Any congressional protections against it. It allows the president to declare emergencies with nothing more than a signature on an executive order, and presidents can renew those emergencies every year ad infinitum. I like that word, or those words, ad infinitum. Congress can vote to end an emergency, but it effectively needs a veto-proof majority to do so. So thanks to a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, we now actually can get a closer look at the presidential powers because we couldn't see what they were. How do you feel about that? We don't even know what powers the president has just given himself. The only reason we know is through a Freedom of Information Act request. So including the president's authority to seize control of all communications as outlined in these documents, which, as the Brennan Center writes here in red, is very broad. Look, suspend or amend the rules and regulations applicable to any or all facilities or stations for wire communication within the jurisdiction of the United States as prescribed by the Commission. Closing any facility of station or wire communication, the removal therefore of its apparatus and equipment. Oh, seems kind of broad.
Yeah.
Does anything that we currently have right now use wires? What is wired communication? If I plug it in and charge it, does that matter?
Well, the FCC has defined broadband as wires now.
Yeah. So Wi-Fi is wired communication.
Any communication.
Any communication. You control from the White House. So wired communication. Turns out it means anything. And today, Politico out with a brand new bombshell today saying that the Department, and by the way, the mainstream media will ignore this story, of course. The Department of Homeland Security under the Biden administration has been doing exactly that. The Department of Homeland Security has a program gathering domestic intelligence, and virtually no one knows about it, writes Politico. Spying on Americans. Didn't we learn anything from Snowden and the NSA story? Maybe they just moved departments. Like the NSA's burned, their asses got chapped. So now we move it to the Department of Homeland Security, where, let's be honest, that's probably where it belonged to begin with.
Yes. But, you know, not a lot was repealed from Snowden. There was a lot of now checks on powers and Congress asking questions. But even in his final chapter of his book, he's like, well, these things now, or at least people are aware of it, you know it. But not a lot of that stopped because of Edward Snowden's whistleblowing.
That's encouraging. Like, what more do you need to do? Like, oh my God. Anyway, among the other things that the Brennan Center discovered, the president can, without congressional approval, use these emergency powers to stop you from traveling. Revoking passports. A passport may not be designated as restricted for travel to or for use in any country other than a country with which the United States is at war, where armed hostilities are in progress, or where there's an imminent danger to the public health and or physical safety of the United States travelers. Broad. We want to stop you from traveling anywhere we can. We'll just revoke it. So now to the bank accounts and the digital dollar. President Biden is moving closer to taking control of our monetary system, pushing us to a digital dollar. It's something we've been warning about for 2 years on this show. And on the face of it, it may sound convenient, right? That's how they're going to couch it to you, that it's convenience. That don't worry about cash. Don't worry about those coins that rattle around in your purse, because now you'll just have one simple ID that you can use on any smartphone, scan it, move it, doesn't matter, bus stop, train station, your Amazon deliveries, whatever you want. It's all in a digital ID. It's all right there, and we'll use this digital dollar. You won't use Bitcoin because we don't want to let you use Bitcoin. You'll use the American Federal Reserve built digital dollar. In March of 2022, President Biden took the biggest steps yet to sign an executive order, again, one of these executive orders, requiring the Federal Reserve to research, experiment, and evaluate the risks and benefits of a digital dollar. So Tom Emmer, House Majority Whip Congressman Tom Emmer this week, just introduced a brand new bill to stop Biden from moving to a digital dollar by using executive emergency powers. It's called the CBDC Anti-Surveillance Act to ban unelected bureaucrats in D.C. from issuing a central bank digital currency in the United States. That's what CBDC stands for. So Emmer, Congressman Emmer, says the White House is about to introduce an authoritarian style and surveillance style digital dollar through, again, executive orders. Watch.
Last week, I introduced the Central Bank Digital Currency Anti-Surveillance State Act to halt the efforts of unelected bureaucrats here in Washington, D.C. from stripping Americans of their right to financial privacy. Digital assets in the digital economy are the future, but the Federal Reserve should play no role in developing a central bank digital currency, or otherwise known as a CBDC. The consequences, if we get it wrong, are far too serious. The Biden administration is currently itching to create a digital authoritarian-styled surveillance-style digital dollar. And through an executive order, they are pursuing analysis on a retail CBDC that would not be open, permissionless, or private.
So,
I mean, you would think this would be bipartisan. This is something that AOC can get out there and really champion in her fancy tax the rich type clothes.
you mean the anti-digital dollar? Or
Yeah,
pro-digital?
you would think that this would be, that this would be bipartisan.
You would think.
That nobody wants a centralized banking system that will give more power to central government.
Where's Elizabeth Warren on this?
Yeah.
Right?
Bernie Sanders. This is a great cause for them to champion around.
And it is about tracking, right? It's about tracking and it's about total control. And again, this is what Catherine Austin Fitts, the brilliant Catherine Austin Fitts, has been talking about for 2 years, 3 years, maybe even longer than that, on this specific issue. Tucker had her on the other night, and I thought that this was really, she nailed the concerns about the CBDC, about the digital currency, and why we should all be focused on this. Watch.
So, Tucker, the one of the bedrocks of freedom is freedom to do financial transactions, including privately, or freedom to do where you want to do and wherever you want to do. And unfortunately, as the financial system has become more and more digital, you see more and more not only invasive surveillance, but more and more controls. You referred to Canada, perfect example. And the reality, as the financial system gets more controlling and more invasive, it's a little bit like bringing up a corral around us. And CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, and vaccine passports or digital IDs are sort of the last shutting of the gate. It's hard for many people to imagine the risks here because we're so used to living with financial transaction freedom. And we don't understand that when this gate closes on us, we literally will be sitting in a system where the central banks believe that our assets belong to them and they can dictate where we can spend money and what we can spend money on. The important thing to understand is central bank digital currencies are not currencies. It gives the ability for the central bankers, and they've said this publicly, the ability to not only set the rules centrally, but enforce the rules centrally. If you don't behave, you can have your money turned off.